Sotah Daf Mem Hey finishes the Gemara's discussion of Egla Arufa and how many members of the Sanhedrin need to go to do the procedure of Egla Arufa. The Gemara is going to analyze that machlokas, have questions on it, link it to another machlokas about Zakin Mamre, and then get into the sugya of Leket, Shikha, specifically Shikha, and show how that connects to this same sugya as well, and explain a machlokes in that sugya. So let's begin. We're in the middle of a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. How many members of the Beis Din have to go out as part of the Egla Arufa process? Rabbi Yehuda had said it is 5, Rabbi Shimon said it's 3, and they're learning from the plurality of the words in the pasuk describing the Egla Arufa, where it says Zikenecha and Shvatecha. So 2 plus 1 to make it odd is 3. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's each of those is 2, which is a total of 4 plus 1, which makes it 5. So there's a kasha that there are other words in the pasuk that are also a plural, which should add more people. It says v'yatzu, and it says umadidu. So v'yatzu is another 2 people. Umadidu is plural, is another 2 people. V'yatzu means and they go out. Umadidu means and they should measure. And they're measuring to see how far the body is from the towns, to see which it is to see which town is the closest one that is responsible for this chalal, for this corpse. So the Gemara's kasha is that it should be 4 more. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it should be 9. According to Rabbi Shimon, it should be 7. So the Gemara answers no. These words where it says here plural yatsu, Madadu, that's to teach me something else. Something which we find in a Brisa. V'yatsu teaches me that the Beis have to go themselves and they can't send messengers. Madu teaches me that even if there's no need to measure, because it can clearly be told which city it's closest to without having to measure, still they should measure anyway, because there's a mitzvah to actually go and measure. All right, now the Gemara wants to say that the Mishnah doesn't fit with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. The Mishnah had said that a few members of the Beis Din have to go out, and that's it. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov says the king and the Kohen Gadol also need to go out. And it's learned from Zikenecha and Sheftecha. He says Zikenecha refers to the Sanhedrin, like we've said, and Sheftecha refers to the king and the Kohen Gadol. How does Sheftecha refer to the king? Because it says Melch b'mishpat yamid aretz, and it refers to the Kohen Gadol because it's the V'asal Kayim Alavim El HaShefet Asher Yeva Yamim Heim. So you see, it calls the Kehanim Sheftim. Now the Gemara says we had a question on Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. We know he holds that the king has to go out and the Kohen Gadol has to go out. That is different than what we learned in our Mishnah. Our Mishnah doesn't say that. Does he also argue about the Sanhedrin? Our Mishnah had said only either 3 or 5 members of the Sanhedrin. Would he hold that the entire Sanhedrin needs to go out or not? So that's our Shaila. So in order to answer this Shaila, the Gemara is going to introduce a Brisa discussing the concept of Zaken Mamre, and based on that, we should hopefully find the answer to our question. Now, Zaken Mamre is the sugya where you have a member of the Sanhedrin, only the Sanhedrin, doesn't apply to anyone else, who goes and he teaches halacha, which is against what the Sanhedrin is paskin, and it's only if the decision was made by the Sanhedrin in the Lishkas Hagazos, in the place where the Sanhedrin sits. So the Brisa discusses what if he went and he taught a wrong halacha, but not something which was taught in the Lishkas Hagazos, something which was taught elsewhere in Yerushalayim. So the Gemara says if they found a Zaken Mamre, that is someone from the Sanhedrin who went and taught halachas contradictory to what the Sanhedrin decided, but it was something that was from outside the Lishkas Hagazos, it was within Yerushalayim, but outside. So it says the Brisa, you would think that that counts as a rebellion. Mamre from the word rebellion, it counts as a rebellion, and therefore he should have all the halachas of a Zaken Mamre. To counteract that, the Torah says, "V'kamta v'alisa el hamakom." It says that you should go ask the Sanhedrin in their place. The function of a Sanhedrin is only if it's in the place where the Sanhedrin sits, in the Azara, in the Lishkas Hagazos. Anywhere else doesn't count as Sanhedrin, and therefore the halachos of Sanhedrin don't apply, and therefore the halachos of Zaken Mamre don't apply because they're limited to Sanhedrin. So now the Gemara says, hold on a second. Now, this decision that was made, it was outside the Lishkas Hagazos. Who made the decision? If it was only part of the Sanhedrin who was there, how could you say that this person that goes against it is a Zaken Mamre? The rest of the Sanhedrin, which aren't there, might agree with him. So he can't be a Zaken Mamre. Zaken Mamre if he's going against the decision of the Sanhedrin. And here you didn't have a decision of the whole Sanhedrin. So it has to be that the entire Sanhedrin went. So then the question is, how is the entire Sanhedrin allowed to leave? Sanhedrin are not allowed to leave the Lishkas Hagazos all at once. You have to have always a minimum of 23 Dayanim in the Lishkas Hagazos, and we learned that from the pasuk in Shir, where it says Shareich Agan Hasahar Al Yechzar Hamazik Bit Necharim Maschitim Suga Bashashanim. So this poetically refers to Sanhedrin, and it says Al Yechzar, it's not allowed to leave. So therefore, the Gemara says how do you have a situation where they all left? The only possible way is that they went out for a mitzvah. So now the question is, what kind of mitzvah could it have been? What mitzvah would cause the entire Sanhedrin to leave? So the only thing we can think of is Eglah Rufa. And the Chachamim, the other two opinions, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, don't hold that the entire Sanhedrin has to go out to Eglah Rufa. They hold only 5 or 3. So therefore, this must be the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and he's holding that the entire Sanhedrin have to go out, and that is our proof. So the Gemara rejects this very simply by saying it's not talking about going out. All your hanachos are correct, except for when you said that they're going out for Eglah Rufa. There could be other things that they are going out for, and that is such as to add on to a city or to add on to the Azara. I have a Mishnah that says you're only allowed to add on to the boundaries of a city or an Azara if the entire Beis Din of Sanhedrin 71 are there. And the Gemara says there is a brisa though that says the pshat over. It says repeats our original brisa about Zaken Mamri over, and it says it in a way that supports our proof. The brisa says if they found them outside Yerushalayim, outside the Azara and the rest of Yerushalayim, and they went, and it's a hamra, and that's if they left in order to measure the Eglah Rufa or to add on to the city and to the Azara. So either circumstance is a valid reason for them to leave. So you see that going out to do Eglah Rufa is a Dvar Mitzvah that the entire Sanhedrin would go out to, which again must be the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, and is a valid proof that he holds that the entire Sanhedrin needs to go out. Okay, now the Gemara goes on further and analyzes the next line in the Mishnah. There, we had seen that the Mishnah says that if you find the cholol in the ground as opposed to on the ground, it does not qualify for what the Torah has said. You need a parsha of Eglah Rufa because it says ba'adama, which means on the ground and not in the ground. Says the Gemara, this is very similar to a discussion we have in the sugya of shikha. Shikha is if you left stalks or grain or the bundles of tied grain behind in the field, and it says there you left it basodeh. Very similar to here it says ba'adama, there it says basodeh. And there we have Machlekes of Yehuda and the Rabbanon. What happens if it wasn't on the ground, but if it was in the ground? If it was on the field, it wasn't on the field, but it was in the field. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, it is excluded. The word basodeh means it has to be on the field, and that excludes if it is hidden or if it's covered, in which case it's not on the field, it's called in the field. The Chachamim disagree. The Chachamim say no, basada means in the field, and that's specifically to include if it's covered or hidden or inside the ground. So our Mishnah, it said the same exact drasha as Rabbi Yehuda. It said ba'adama means to exclude if it's in the ground. It means only if it's on the ground. So would you say then that our Mishnah has to be the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda and not the opinion of the Chachamim? So the Gemara says no. The Chachamim and Rabbanon are only arguing as to how the drasha works there because of how the pasuk is phrased, and here the pasuk is phrased differently, and the Rabbanon could very likely say the same drasha. And the reason is as follows: what would you have said without the word basodeh, without the word ba'adama? What was the pre-existing notion? So in the case of the Eglah Rufa, the language that the pasuk has is ki yimotzei cholol, which seems to say when you find the chol, meaning you find it anywhere. That would seem to include in the ground or on the ground. Then when the Torah says ba'adama, it's coming to change what we said before, and therefore must be saying only on the ground and not in the ground. And the Chachamim could very much agree with that. And the Chachamim still would say that in the case of basada, of shikha, it would go the other way, because there it says ki siksar kitzircha basadecha. It says and v'shachachta omer. So it says that the shikha, similar to the katir, that which you forgot is similar to what you cut. Just like when you cut it, it wasn't hidden under the ground, it wasn't hidden anywhere. You harvest the field is exposed. The shikha also has to be something that's exposed. That's what I would have said had it not said the pasuk basodeh. Comes along the pasuk basodeh, and that teaches me to change from that to include that which is hidden in the ground. And therefore, the Chachamim hold that in the case there you have to learn that the pasuk basodeh is to include something which is in the ground, and it doesn't mean afka on the ground. But in our case, that's not. You would have the opposite pre-existing notion, and therefore, when the Torah teaches you something, it would teach me to exclude it, not to include it. So now the Gemara says, okay, now let's analyze this machlokes more deeply by shikha. So you have a machlokes by shikha. What does the word basodeh mean? The Chachamim say that Basodeh means to include something hidden, and Rabbi Yehuda says it means to exclude something hidden. And the Chum say that they learn it from Basodeh because it's an extra word. So what does Rabbi Yehuda do? He should have the drasha of shikha similar to katzir. That which you are forgetting is similar to what's open, and he should have the same drasha as the chachamim. Why does he not have that? So the Gemara says yes, he does. He does hold of it, and therefore we have to change pshat in Rabbi Huda. So what then, according to Rabbi Huda, he does not start off with that limud, and therefore Basad is not flipping that. So he holds. Rabbi Yehuda holds that it has to be b'dafka, something which is exposed, something which is hidden is no good, and he has the limud of that the shikha is similar to the katzir. So what then does he do with the word basadeh, which the chachamim learn flips it? He must do something else with that. So the Gemara explains, yes, he does. Besides to teach me something else, it's to teach me that you could have a parsha of shikha even on stalks which are still growing. If you forgot to harvest some stalks, shikha applies to that as well. That's why it says, Omer basodeh, something which is in the field, meaning it's still growing in the field. Now, how do everybody know that halacha? So the Gemara says because it says kitzircha bisadecha. It says basadeh twice. It says once v'shachachta emer basadeh, and earlier it says kisikta kitzircha bisadecha. There, that basadecha, that from the fact that it says in your field there, that teaches me that even if it's still growing, you still have the concept of shikha. Now, what does Rabbi Yehuda do with that? Why doesn't he learn from there? So the Gemara says Rabbi Yehuda learns that that word is needed for something else. It's needed for halacha taught by Rabbi Avo in the name of Rabbi Elazar, who says, what happens if the wind blows your stalks into somebody else's field? And that's why you forget it, because it's not in your field, it's in someone else's field. So you learn from Basadecha that it's only shikha if it's in your field, but if it's someone else's field, it's not called shikha. You're allowed to go back and take it. The sugya of shikha does not apply to that. Now, what are the chachamim then? How do they know that halacha? So the Gemara says the Chachamim learned that from the fact that it ends off with a chaf. It could have just said mi basodeh. It could have said basodeh. It could have said kitzikta kitzircha basodeh. What's a besadecha? That extra chaf is what teaches you this halacha. Now Rabbi Yehuda says no, you can't learn a drasha just from an extra chaf. The drasha has to be from the entire word. Therefore, he says the entire word is not available to flip the meaning of in the field, on the field, and he goes with the original halacha. Shikha has to be similar to katzir, and they both have to be exposed to exclude something which is hidden. Now the Gemara brings a shayla that Rav Yirmiyah asks. Rav Yirmiyah asks, what happens if your own crops, your own stalks, blow away, but they stay in your field? So they're still in the field, but now they're not really on the field because they're not going to be on the ground. Now, because they blew, they're on top of something. Either they're on top of a rock, or they're on top of other stalks, on top of something else. So it's not on the field. So does this count as basadeh or not? So we've now broken basadeh into three things. The normal situation where it's growing or it's lying on the field, it's basadeh. The question of does basadeh mean if it's hidden in the field, underground? And now we're saying, what if it's in the airspace? Where it's basadeh, does that count as basadeh as in the field if it's in the air? Because it's not resting on the ground, it's resting on top of something else. That's the shayla that Rabbi Yirmiyah asks. So now the Gemara says, Rav Kahana setter of Papi, and some say Rav Kahana setter of Zvid. You could actually learn the answer to this from the halacha of Rabbi Avo, name of Rabbi Elazar. He said that if it blows into someone else's field, then there is no sugya of shikha. That's because it's in someone else's field. The implication is that if it would blow into your own field, you would have shikha. Now, if it blows away in your own field, that's exactly the question you asked. It's lying on top of something else. It blew away, and still you see clearly that the diak of from Rabbi Avo's halacha, only if it's someone else's field you don't have shikha, but in your own field you do have shikha. So you see, you do have shikha even if it's in the airspace, it's not lying directly on the field. Gemara asks, hold on, according to what you're saying, the reason why you don't have to bring lekan and shikha if it blows into your neighbor's field is because it's on his other stalks or it's on a rock or something, because it's a state of having blown away. But if it would have landed on his field, then you're telling me you would be chayiv? Because otherwise you have the same diak you could make. In your neighbor's field, you're not chayiv, but in your own field you are. That wouldn't make any sense. Certainly, the reason that you're not chayiv in your neighbor's field is because it's in his field, because it's not besadcha. And therefore, it has nothing to do with the fact that it blew onto something. And you can't make a diak, that if it blew onto something, there you're not chayiv, but if it blew onto something in your own field, you are. It has nothing to do with the blowing on. It has to do with being in his field. So, therefore, the Gemara has to revise. Says the Gemara, therefore, it has to be when it says that it blew into the other field. It's nothing to do with the fact that it blew. The halacha is because it's in the other field. That's why it's no good. And it makes no difference if it blew onto the ground, off the ground. That's not the issue. The only reason we said blew is because there's no other way to get into the field. Our shaila is talking about when it's on something else. Also, nothing really to do with blowing. It's about if it's in the airspace. It's not lying on the field. You don't see anything from here to resolve that. The Gemara now tries another proof to resolve the question of whether, if it's not lying on the ground, it's on something else, which is what the Gemara calls floating, whether that is in the parsha of Shikha or not. So it's from a verse that says, if you have a bundle and you pick it up in order to take it to the city and you put it down and forget about it, so ordinarily it's Shikha, but what if you put it down on top of another bundle that was lying there? So now you have two bundles stacked on each other. So you forgot both of them. So what is the halacha of these? So the Tana Kama says the bottom one is shikha, the top one is not shikha. Rav Shimon ben Yehuda says, in the name of Rav Shimon, they are both not shikha. So the reason that the bottom one is not shikha is because it's hidden. It's hidden under the top one. The reason that the top one is not shikha is because it's floating, it's not on the ground. So the whole machlokes is about the bottom one. Is there a problem of being hidden or not? But the top one, everybody agrees, is not shikha, and they must all agree that the reason is because it's floating, it's not lying on the ground itself. So the Gemara says, there you have a clear proof that if it's floating, is no mitzvah of shikha on it. So the Gemara says, no, here it's different. The reason is not because it's floating. The reason is because he picked it up to take it to the city. Once he picked it up to take it to the city, it can't be shikha anymore because he already was zeichen it. He already made it his. So the Gemara says, then why? There's two issues there. First of all, why does it have to be that you put it on top of another bundle to say that it has a patur? Even if you just put it on the ground, it has a patur because you picked it up. The Gemara says, you're right. The only reason why we mentioned you put it on top of the second one is because we wanted to talk about if the second one has the halacha of being hidden under the first one or not. Second question the Gemara asks is, why do we say? He said the reason is mipnei shehutzak, because it's floating, because it's on top of something. You can't tell me the reason is because he picked it up. The reason is, it says clearly, the reason is because it's on top of something. The Gemara says no, because it's light. So change the wording slightly. Instead of saying mipnei shehutzaf, it's mipnei shehutzaf. It's like it's floating, because since he picked it up, it has the halachic status of being like floating. Now the Gemara quotes something from Abaye. Abaye said, I am like Ben Azai in the streets of Torah. Ben Azai was a Talmud Chacham that anybody could ask anything. Rashi says Abaye was feeling good that day, and he said that therefore I can answer anything at this time. So he came along someone and asked him a shaila. He asked, what if you have two corpses, one lying on top of the other? Which is the one that you should use for Eglar Rufa? Rashi says the nafkamina is if one is if they're slightly off, they're not stacked up exactly, and one is closer to one city and one is closer to the other city. So what's the issue? So the lower one should be tamun, should be hidden, and the upper one should be floating. So the question is, which one do you use? Neither of them are ba'adama, at least not according to the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So the Gemara says the issue here is min b'minoi. Do you say that floating on top of the exact same type of thing as you is called floating? And do you say being hidden under the exact same type of thing of you is called hidden? Here you have a corpse on top of a corpse. Is that called hidden or is it called floating? So the Gemara spells out three possibilities. Rashi says the fourth one is obvious. The possibility is that floating exists by min b'minoi, and hidden does not, and therefore the lower one does not count as hidden, and you could use him, but you can't use the top one. Or you could say the opposite. You could say that you could use the top one and not the lower one because floating does not count by min b'minai, but hidden counts. Or you could say that they both count and you can't use either of them. And of course you could say that neither of them count. They're not considered to be floating or hidden because it's min b'minai, because it's exactly the same type of thing, and therefore you could use either of them. This is a question was asked to Abaye. So Abaye answered, you could learn it based on the discussion we just had about one bundle on top of another bundle, and over there we saw that the top one, everyone agrees is not chayiv in shikha. We already said that has nothing to do with the fact that it's floating. That's because he picked it up in order to take it to the city. The bottom one was a machlekes. So it was a machlekes whether or not it has the patur of being talmud, of being hidden under the upper one or not. Now this is min b'mina. So there's two ways of understanding this. The Gemara first wants to say that this machlekes is exactly over this issue that we raised. Is min b'mina still considered talmud or not? And you see it's machlokes here in these two opinions, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda and the Chachamim. One says yes, one says no. Says Gemara, it's not necessarily the pshat. It could really be that everybody agrees that it is tamun. The question is tamun a problem or not? We saw this in machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim if tamun's a problem or not in the sugya of like a chikka and payas. They could all agree that it is tamun. The question here is whether or not tamun is an issue in these halachas. So the Gemara says no. If that's what the machlokes is about, so why do we have to talk about where it's stacked one bundle on top of another bundle? We should talk about where it's hidden in dirt or rocks or something else. Someone says, yeah, we really could have talked about dirt and rocks. We just want to tell you how far Rabbi Yehuda goes, that even though it's min b'mina, Rabbi Yehuda will still say that it's tamon, and he'll still say that it doesn't have a halacha of a halal, and you should not do egla rufa, even though it's min b'mina. The Gemara now quotes a brisa which expands on the machlokes as to whether we exclude tamun or tzaf. It also lists a number of other things that we could exclude from the words of the psukim. So the Torah refers to the corpse as a halal. Halal means someone who's killed by a weapon, by a sword. So it says the brisa has to be halal and not someone who's strangled. It has to be a halal, meaning that he's killed, and not someone who is flitting in and out of consciousness and on the verge of death. Also, we learn from the fact that it says adama, it has to be on the ground and not in the ground, and not floating. It says that it fell. It has to be that it's fallen on the ground and it's not hanging from a tree in the field, and not that it's floating on the water. Now, this is all the Tanakama. Rav Elazar says the last few as to where he is, he doesn't hold of. He says as long as it qualifies as a halal, then you have to do egla arufa. So Gemara quotes another brisa where Rabbi Yehuda answers Rav Elazar, and he says you would agree that halal doesn't need anything else. If it's not halal, it doesn't matter where it is, even if it qualifies as far as its location. If it doesn't qualify as a halal, you're not going to do egla rufa. So if it's choked or if it's in the trash can, you would not. It's in the trash heap. You would not say that it's a halal and that it's ba'adama. So why do you therefore say that halal is enough and you don't need any of the other things? It has to be not hidden in the ground and not floating in the air and not floating on top of something and not floating in the water. All those things, it should, the same way it's not enough to qualify as one of the other things. If it's not a halal, it shouldn't be enough to qualify as a halal if it's not one of the other things. So Gemara says no. Rav Elazar answers because it says halal multiple times, and that teaches me that halal is the main thing. And if it qualifies as a halal, it doesn't matter what else you have. And if it doesn't qualify as a halal, then it makes no difference. Even if you qualify as everything else, it's still not going to have the mitzvah of egla rufa. Next.